of Numbers. To the book of Numbers. When you find the book of Numbers, chapter 13, let's go back to Exodus chapter 3. Opening verse is going to be in Exodus chapter 3, 7 and 8. Don't forget we got baptizing directly after the service. I told Sydney it was my first one. I was kidding. I said, it's my first one, and her mouth dropped to the floor. So, all right, Exodus chapter 3, verse 7 and 8. And when you find that, make sure that you're back in Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13. If you would stand for the reading of God's Word in Exodus chapter 3, verse 7 and 8. I know we went over Exodus a few months ago on Wednesday night, but I want to read these three verses. Exodus chapter 3, verse 7 and 8. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people, which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. It says, I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land unto the good land, and a large, and unto the land flowing with milk and honey. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you and we love you. We thank you, dear God, because you first loved us when we were unlovable. Dear God, we want to thank you for still saving lost individuals. We ask you, dear God, just to be with the other churches across our nation, dear God, and help preachers to preach the gospel. We ask you, dear God, just to be with us for the next few moments and bring us again safely back Wednesday night. And for all the prayer requests that we have heard, dear God, we lift them up to the throne of grace. In your name we pray. Amen. You may be seated. In Numbers chapter 13, it's probably one of my most favorite, and it's also one of the saddest chapters in the Old Testament. It is a chapter of unbelief. It is a chapter that is filled with promises. It is a chapter that is filled with hope, and it is a chapter that is filled with proof of God's grace and God's mercy and God's promises. But it is also a chapter filled of unbelief. It is of faithlessness. It is people that are not wanting to take hold of what God has planned for you. Now, this is not a name it, claim it, blab it, grab it message. I am not talking about stuff. I am talking merely about the spiritual things that God has laid up for His children. And if you study the book of Numbers, you will find out that the book of Numbers is really about two individuals. Or actually three individuals. It's about God, it's about Caleb, and it is also about a man by the name of Joshua. In the book of Numbers chapter 13, Moses is going to send 12 spies. You know this story. Moses is going to send 12 spies that are going to go over and to the land of Canaan, what is now what that is called in the Old Testament. And God has already promised, even in the book of Exodus, what we've just read, that in the land of Canaan, in that promised land, is where the children of Israel are going to be at. He has already promised that if you'll just go over there, do a little bit of fighting, leave everything else up to me, it will be in your hands. But what you have to do is get rid of the inhabitants that are already in that land. They have got to be removed. And God makes this promise to Moses, and He brings them out of Egypt. And now they are just right across the River Jordan, and they are fixing to cross over, or not across the River Jordan, they are down south of the Dead Sea. And they are going to send 12 individuals to go make a decision for millions of individuals. A decision that has already been promised by God. If you'll go in and do as I say, that's all you have to do. But Moses is going to send 12 individuals, and the 12 individuals are going to come back with the report of 10 that we cannot do it, and 2 that says, let's go ahead and do it. And those people are Caleb and Joshua. Then you have the other 10 individuals that are listed in chapter 13, verses 4 all the way through verses 15. What happens is that you have these 12 individuals, and they are going to cross over, and they are going to spy out this land. They are going to see where all the Canaanites and Jebusites and the Hittites and all those ites are going to be living. They're going to see the great walls of Jericho. They're going to see these great giants, and they're going to come back with this negative report. And I want you to look with me. We're going to look at that. We're not going to go through the whole chapter. You don't have to worry. We might have to come back next Sunday or maybe the Sunday after. But I want to kind of look at this and kind of dwell on it. And I know that the Old Testament, especially all of the book of the Bible, is a Jewish book, but especially the Old Testament is pointed directly to the Jews. But I think that we can take stories out of the Old Testament and not only apply it to our lives, but we can apply it to the life of the church. So what I am doing now is I am preaching to the church. This is for you guys. So in Numbers chapter 13, look with me, and we're going to go through these verses. Very important chapter of promises, proof, and unbelief, and not taking hold of what God has for you. And this is what Moses says to them in verse 18. And see the land, what it is, and the people that dwelleth there, whether they be strong, weak, few, or many. Verse 19, and what the land is that they dwell therein, whether it be good or bad. God has already told them it's good, right? He said it's going to be a land filled with milk and honey. What cities that they dwell in, whether it be in tents or in strongholds. And they're going to view that in Jericho with the walls. Look in verse 20. And what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, God has already promised this back in the book of Exodus. If you'll examine that, and if you look at all the white area that's in between those verses, basically God is telling them it's great land, it's wonderful land, there's going to be people there that are strong, there's going to be strongholds. Just rely on me, rely on my promises, and I will get you through this. They have been promised this and promised this and promised this. But Moses goes up and says, see if it's going to be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not. And this is very important. And be ye of good courage. Don't be afraid. Don't be frightful, because you have a sovereign God that made the world, that made everything, that is going to be fighting for you. Be of good courage. And bring of the fruit of the land. They want proof. That is something we always want from God, isn't it? We like His promises and we'll dwell on His promises, but the one thing that we want from God is we want proof. Or like Gideon, when he wanted proof from God and he tested God those 2 times. What we want from God is we want His promises, but His promises really aren't good enough for us, especially as churches. What we want from God is absolute proof. We want proof. And all the proof that God needs to give us is found within this Bible. This Bible holds all the promises and all the proof that God has for us, not only as Christians, but as a nation, but most importantly, as a church. We have all the proof here. And it says now the time was at the time of the first grape, which is going to be either May or June. So they, 12 individuals, are going to make a report for millions of people. These millions of people are not going to rely on the promises of God. These millions of people are going to rely on 12 individuals to make a decision for them. They are no longer relying on God. It sounds like a lot of churches today. We no longer rely on God. We rely on human beings to get us through and to gain our promises for us. And it should not be like that. Our churches are set up to rely fully on a sovereign God. We have all the promises. Again, this is not money. This is spiritual promises. We have all the equipment that we need up in heaven to fulfill these promises that God gives us. But yet we let a few in the church deny us of those promises. What is amazing, they are going to let 10 individuals deny them of the promises of God, and they are going to have to wonder for 40 years because of unbelief. A lot of churches on Sand Mountain have been wandering, quote unquote, for 40 years in the wilderness because they do not rely on the promises of God. They rely on man. And it's sad. If you want to know why so many of our churches are closing their doors, it's because they're relying on man instead of God. And he tells them, it says in verse 21, so they went up, those 12 individuals, and this is what is going to happen. And they searched the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob, and the man came to Hamath. They travel about 150 miles to get there. So they're going to travel about 150 miles, and I want you to see what is going to happen. They are actually going to see with their physical eyes, not with their spiritual eyes. Everything that these 12 individuals are going to see, they are going to see the exact same thing. They are not going to see something separate. They are not going to see 12 different types of things. All of these 12 individuals are going to see the same thing. And they ascended, look in verse 22, by the south, and they came up to a place that is called Hebron. It means alliance. The amazing thing about Hebron is it was a Levitical city. It was a city of the Levites. Another thing about the Hebron, it was actually a city of refuge. If you had committed some kind of crime, you could run to one of these 12 cities, which is Hebron, and you could stay there. It was a city of refuge. And it was also a very important city to King David because Hebron was his very first capital. So Hebron is a very important part of Israel. Hebron sits in the mountains. So they go up to this place and they find a place that is named Hebron. I want you to look. With Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai. I want you to, if you mark in your Bible, I want you to underline those three individuals' names. Those three individuals are Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai. Three people. Three. And it says that they are the children of Anak. And I want you to look what is put in parentheses. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zion in Egypt. It's a very old city. And for a very old city, they have had problems. There's three individuals that are living in that city. There are three individuals that are living in alliance. There are three individuals that are living in Hebron. And it tells us in verse 33, we're going to skip ahead, but we're going to come back, tells us in verse 33 that they were giants. You have these individuals, Ahiman, you have Shishai, and you have Talmai. Three people. And it says, and they were the children of Anak. And I want you to look, it just kind of passes by those individuals, doesn't it? They see these three people, and we know later that they are giants. And it kind of glosses over them, and they continue to go. And they came into the brook Eshcol, and they cut down from thence a branch, one branch, with one cluster of grapes. And on this one cluster of grapes, they had to bear it between two upon a staff. And they brought of the pomegranates and of the figs. Did God tell them that it was going to be a land that was filled with milk and honey? Now, it does not actually mean that milk and honey was going to be flowing out of the mountains. It actually meant that it was going to be a place that was going to be good for your cattle. It was going to be good for your family. It was going to be good for your children. It is going to supply you with everything you need. God is the same thing. God supplies you with everything, not that you want, but with everything that you need. And in our churches, we do not want the needs of God. We want what is the wants of men. What we need in our churches is to get back to understanding, and we will never will, who God really is and what God can do. But guess what? We won't do it. So they come and they get all the proof. They get the grapes, they get the pomegranates, they get the figs, these 12 individuals. Did they all see those three giants? Yes, they did. But they gloss right over it and they go right back to the proofs of what God has promised them. So they get all this stuff, and the place of the brook was called Eshcol because of the cluster of grapes, and the children of Israel cut down from thence. And they returned from searching in the land for, guess what, 40 days. If you study typology, that is a type of testing. So they stay in that place for 40 days. For 40 days, they sing the exact same thing. For 40 days, they travel 150 miles, and they see everything. They see Jericho, they see the giants, they see the pomegranates, they see the figs, they see the grapes. They see absolutely everything, and God said, yes, it's going to be there. It's going to be there, but what you're going to have to do is go over and claim it. You're going to have to go over and claim it. I want you to look in verse 26. And they went and came to Moses, these 12 individuals. After 40 days, you've got millions of people. You've got people like Aaron, you've got people like Moses, and they are waiting, and they are waiting, and they are waiting. And every day they get up, they probably go out. Are they back yet? No, they're not back. They'll maybe be back tomorrow. Next day passes along. Are they back now? No, they're not back. Hope they didn't get killed. Next day and next day. And finally, after 40 days, they look, and here comes 12 individuals. And with those 12 individuals, they got the grapes, they got the pomegranates, they got the figs. They have been gone for 40 days. And guess what? Here they come. And Moses and Aaron, don't you look in verse 26, and they went and they came unto Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. All the congregation. If you want to put that kind of in parentheses, you can put to all the church. They came to all the church. They came to all the congregation or all the church of the children of Israel. Every one of them are listening. You could have heard a pin drop. They've been gone. The people that are married, they hug their wives, they hug their kids, glad to be back, but we got some things that we need to tell you. God has already promised back in the book of Exodus, you have to remember that, God has already promised them back in the book of Exodus, this is your land. I have set this land up for you. And by the way, in 2017, it's still their land. Despite what everyone else says, Israel is still the land of the Jews, and it is still God's land. But they come up to Moses in verse 26. And Aaron and all the congregation of Israel unto the wilderness of Paran and Kadesh. And they brought back word unto them, and this is what they say, unto all the congregation, and showed them proof. If you wanted proof, if the land was good, if you wanted proof, if the land was great, if you wanted that type of proof, here it is. That's all you got to do is look at it. Here is the proof, and they showed them the what? The fruit of the land. Do our churches on Sand Mountain have fruit in them? The one thing that you will recognize not only by a Christian or by a church is the fruit that they bear. And that land that is in Hebron, in Israel, back during that time, it was a fruit-bearing land. But 10 individuals say, we don't want it. We can't have it. 2 of them says, we want it. So they bring all this back and they showed them the fruit. You want to know what God's promises are? You got proof. Every one of you probably got one sitting in your lap right now, and it's called a Bible. If you want to know what God's proof is, it's this. These are not man-made promises. These are God-made promises, and He will, I promise you, fulfill them. And He tells us now in verse 27, and when they told them, they said, this is what they said. We came into the land whither thou sentest us, and that's true. And surely, yes it did, back in the book of Exodus, what did God say it was going to be flowing with? Milk and honey. And they said, listen, after all that time, and we traveled out here, we finally get to the land, and in 40 days, guess what? That milk and honey is still there. It is great land. It's great land for our cows. It's great land for our sheep. It's great land for our kids. I mean, listen, it has a lot of great stuff in there. Everything we've seen, God promised it. It's there, Moses. And it's got milk, and it's got honey, and if you want the proof, here it is. And that word in verse 28 kills everything. That word, nevertheless, you could also interpret that, despise all that, but. Moses and Aaron and children of Israel, listen, it's got the milk and it's got the honey, and listen, here's the fruit. But 99.9% of that time, if you see that word nevertheless or but in the Bible, you're going to have great news in front of it. But you know what comes after it? It's bad news. These people have seen it, and they're looking, and they're listening, and all of a sudden, when he uses that word, nevertheless, guess what? It's like you take and you suck all the wind out of that place. Nevertheless, do they mention anything about God now? No. They mention anything about His promises? No. Do you know what these people have experienced since they've been living in Egypt? They've seen all the plagues. They've seen how God moved in and the death angel moved in and how He took the firstborn. These are the individuals that took blood from a lamb and they struck it over the doorpost. This is the people. These people are not ignorant on God's promises. These people know what God can do. God promised them for 400 some odd years, you're going to stay there, but guess what? I'm going to bring you out. These people know who God is and know what God can do. But they use that word, and we use it all the time in church, but. Can't do it, preacher. Why? Can't do it. Well, you can tell me why, I just can't. Just too much trouble. I don't want to fool with it. Nevertheless. And I promise you, Caleb and Joshua probably went like this. Not today. Not now. Guys, we've been over there for 40 years. Please don't do this. Please don't do this. Nevertheless, not God. Who's strong in that land? The people. The people be strong. Oh yeah, Moses and Aaron, we know what God can do. And we know what God has done for us. As a matter of fact, do you remember when we were standing at that sea and God parted it and how we walked on dry land, and as we crossed over we looked back and all the Egyptian army? Yeah, we remember that. But the people, these people, Moses and Aaron, guys, these are big guys. We just seen three. We see these three people, and they were children of Anak. These three guys are huge. Yeah, but didn't God destroy the Egyptian army? Yeah, we know that, but nevertheless. Preacher, we'd like to do some things in our church, go for it, but. We'd like to see our church grow, preacher, okay, let's do it, but. Let's do this, let's do that, nevertheless. I hate that word. Can't do it. It should be stricken from our vocabulary. But wait a minute, guys. Wait. You said the people strong? Yeah, they're strong. Oh, and it's worse than that. I want you to listen to this. Not only are the people strong that dwell in the land, but they've got cities, they've got walls around them. We've never seen anything like it before in our life. We go up to this city, and on the GPS it says Jericho. We look up, and there's a great big wall around it. We can't do anything about it. Oh, by the way, did we mention we seen three individuals that was giants? Can't deal with them either. And they dwell in the land, the cities are wall, and have they yet to mention, but we know what God can do? Have they yet to mention, listen, Moses and Aaron, we know it's going to be a fight. We know it's going to be tough, but guess what? God's promised us this, and we're going to take it. Have they yet to mention any of that? What they are doing is they are focusing on the giants and not on God. What we've done in our church is we have focused on giants and not on God. They're strong. They got walled cities that are very great. And oh, by the way, we went over there and we seen these people that were the children of Anak. There's three of them. How many children of Israel? 2 or 3 million. Can't take on three people? It's impossible. Don't fool with it. I tell you what we're going to do. Let's just go back to Egypt. We was happy over there. It was rough, but let's just go back to Egypt. Let's don't move ahead. Have you noticed that God has kept his mouth shut this whole time, and he's listening, and he's listening, and he's listening, and he's listening to them make excuse after excuse after excuse. And what is the big problem? People say the big problem is that they're not relying on God. Yeah. The big problem is they're looking through human eyes and not through spiritual eyes. And the Amalekites, and the Hittites, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites, and all the ites, guess what? They're there. They dwell there, and they're there by the sea and all over the coast. What basically they're saying, listen, you cannot sling a dead cat in this area without hitting somebody that is big. They are everywhere. Moses and Aaron, we're going to form a committee, and we're going to make a move to vote to go back to Egypt. You know, that's a lot of churches today on this mountain. God's made promises after promises after promises. But guess what we do? We look not at God, but we look at the giants. And Caleb, every church needs either a Caleb or a Joshua. Do you know that? You either need a Caleb or a Joshua. Do you know what the name Caleb means? It means to attack like a dog. That's what it means. And the word Joshua means Jehovah is like me. or I am like Jehovah. You need these kind of individuals because he stands up and this is what he says. He stilled the people before Moses, and this is what he says. Let's don't think about it. Let's don't form a committee. Let's don't go home and sleep on it. Let's don't have a cup of coffee over it. Let us go when? Now. Do you know when the best time to do something for God is? Right now. Because we are not promised tomorrow. Do something for God right now. And not only let's not just go up there, let's go up there and let's what? Possess it. Let's take it because it's really ours. They're just kind of squatters, and they went up there and they took over this land. We're going to go back and we're going to do it. Let's go up there and let's possess it. Let's take it right now. And it says, for we are able to what? Overcome. We are. We are able to overcome this. Yes, you've got the children of Anak. Yes, you've got walled cities. Yes, you've got big people. But guess what? We can go up at once. We can possess it because we are able to do that. But, always remember that word. Nevertheless and but. You've got great news. What came right before that? Caleb telling them some great news. Listen, we can do it. We can possess it. We can do it. Don't worry about it. Let's just go, guys. Let's go right now. And then what's the next word that comes in? But when the men that went up with him said, we be not able to go up against the people. And this is sad. This is really sad. For they are stronger than we are. You know, that's the attitude, and in all honesty, that is the attitude of a lot of people in our churches. Can't do it. You want to grow? Yeah. You want to get people saved? I sure do. You want to start some small groups and stuff? I really do. But guess what? Can't do it. Why not? Walled cities, giants, and we just can't do it. We're not able to go up against the people, for they never mention God. For they are stronger than we are. And I want you to look. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land the which we had gone to search, it is a land that eateth up. Now, I promise they're Baptist, because I want to read that again. They brought up an evil report. They formed a committee, and they got the votes. We're going to pass this, and we're going to hand this down. Can't do it. Do you know who they're actually going? They're not going against Caleb. They're not going against Joshua. Do you know who they're going against? They're going against God. Because they bring up an evil report. They say, God says it's good. Yes. God says it's got everything you need. Yes. No, it doesn't. It don't. Why? Because 10 people said it didn't. And they bring up this evil report, and they go to the land, and this is what it says. It eated up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. They are giants. And I want you to look. And there we saw, here they are again. And there we saw the giants, the son of Anak. Those three individuals. And it says, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight. And we were in our own sight. Who are they looking at? Theirself. Are they focusing on God? No. They have got their eyes on two things, giants and self. We have got our eyes on two things, giants and self. When we need to be tunneled vision in on God. And he says we were as grasshoppers in their sight. We need to get to the point in our lives that we could care less what people think about us. That is the truth. We don't want, listen, if we do this, if we do this, they're going to think we're some kind of Jesus freak, some kind of radical, something odd. They're going to accuse us of being a cult. Who cares? Because the giants out there in your life, and I'm fixing to close while we get one song of invitation. The giants that are out there in your life, yes, they're watching you. Yes, they are intimidating. And yes, at times they may seem to be able to eat up the inhabitants. But what we need to do as a people and what we need to do as a church is to keep our eyes on God. Let me tell you what happens. If you go to the book of Joshua, go to Joshua chapter 14. Joshua chapter 14. They spend 40 years in the wilderness. I'm fixing to close, I promise. They spend 40 years in the wilderness, wandering around. And in those 40 years, guess who is still in Hebron? For 40 years, they've wandered and they've bellyached and they've griped, and God said, the only way you're going to go into that is I'm going to kill this generation. And when this generation's gone, then you're going to be able to go over and you're going to be able to claim the land. There was one piece of property that Caleb wanted, and you know what it was? It was where those 3 giants lived at. Caleb said that there's a piece of property, Joshua, that I want. 40 years ago, I seen it. Guess how old Caleb is right now? He's around 85 years old. We've got a gray-haired old man wandering around on a cane saying, listen, there's some piece of property out there that I want, and there's 3 giants that live on it. Let me have it. Joshua says, you want to go up there? Look in verse 14. Chapter 14, I'm sorry. Chapter 14, verse 11. As yet I am as strong this day as I was in the day that Moses sinned. For 40 years, do you know what's been on Caleb's mind? Hebron. For 40 years, what's been on Caleb's mind? Giants. For 40 years, all he has wanted to do is one more time. Give me one more chance, God. Don't give me a committee. Don't give me a vote. Give me one more chance. I want to go take it. 85-year-old man, all he's had on his life is Hebron. All he has had on his life is an alliance with God. And he knows there's 3 individuals that is going to be standing in his way. And I want you to keep reading with me. And as this day is, I'm as strong as that day that Moses sent in me. As my strength was then, even so is my strength now for what? War. Both to go out and to come in. Caleb knew that right then. If I go into Hebron, it's going to be mine. If I go into Hebron, it's mine. Joshua, 40 years ago, you and I went up there. Joshua, for 40 years, all I've thought about is Hebron. Let me have it. Now, therefore, give me this mountain. Let me have it. Guess who's been living on that mountain for 40 years? For 40 years, you have Ahiman, you got Shishai, and Talmai. For 40 years, they've occupied Hebron. For 40 years, they've been there. And now an 85-year-old individual says it's time for them to move on. Look at chapter 15, verse 14. And Caleb drove thence the 3 sons. Do you know what? This should have took place 40 years prior. Do you know that? 40 years prior, this is what should have happened. So Caleb takes his walking stick and he goes up there to the sons of Anak that are still there. Do you know how long giants hang around? As long as you allow them to. If you look at that giant Goliath, guess how long they let him hang around? As long as he wanted to. We're not going to do anything about it. Yes, he's stopping us from growing. Yes, he's doing that. But guess what? We're going to leave him alone. Because he's bigger and he's stronger than us. But we have a man by the name of Caleb. He goes up and he takes Shishai, Ahiman, and Talmai, the children of Anak, and guess what? This is my mountain. Guys, you've been here for some odd more than 40 years. It's mine now. Go home. Always sing one verse of invitation.